Hi, everyone. Welcome. Almost just a couple more days to go until we get to start the spring quarter and History 443, Topics and Issues in Asian History. And the subtopic is Taiwanese Film and History. This is a course I've been waiting a long time to be able to teach, and I'm very excited that you'll be here to watch these films with me and learn about this pretty interesting place, well, I'd call it a very interesting place, that we don't always hear a lot about. And I'm hoping that these films will be a useful and valuable and hopefully unique way to learn about this history. My goal is to put up one of these videos every week, maybe 3 days or so before we meet on Monday. So maybe that puts it around Friday or so, where I would introduce some of the main ideas that I would want you to be paying attention to in the readings and then in the films. Especially if you haven't studied Taiwan before, or maybe East Asian history at all, you may feel like some of these ideas are new or just things you haven't thought a lot about. And so before we get into the readings, my goal is just to introduce them in some way in the films as well. Hopefully give you some guides each week for things to be thinking about, and that we'll take up more when we meet on Mondays and Wednesdays. And so the goal here is just to introduce the class in a general way. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the syllabus, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the syllabus here, but I would want you to take a look at it and just get a sense for how the class is going to work. And then we'll have time on Monday to just go more into detail about the mechanics of the class and things like that, the assignments. But what I wanted to do here is just to introduce some general things about Taiwan and just kind of get you thinking about how you might start studying the history of this place. And so you see it behind me. This is a map that was drawn by a Dutch artist in 1729. And he's just reoriented the island a different way than we're used to seeing it. Why the Dutch? Well, the Dutch were the first to colonize Taiwan. And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about throughout the course is this history of colonial rule and the rule of Taiwan by outside parties and outside nations and outside empires. The films we watch aren't really going to be about these things, but there's going to be this important historical background that I will want us to really get into. And I hope it's going to help us understand these films a lot better. What I thought I would do is just show you, again, just in the interest of getting you thinking about Taiwan, just give you some general facts about it, and then I'll say a little bit about the readings and again, just about the class in general. So I want to call up a PowerPoint here that will be pretty brief. You see this gorgeous picture here that I put on here just first because it's a really pretty picture, and then I just realized it also speaks to the colonial history of Taiwan as well. And so this is the Alishan Mountain Railway. So Alishan is a very high mountain, as you can see here. And this railroad was built by the Japanese when they had their turn ruling Taiwan, as we'll talk about, has become this real landmark. It's a unique narrow gauge railway. It shows a lot of real technical expertise in building it. The scenery is gorgeous, as you can see. But another interesting thing about it, it's not only a beautiful picture, but it also speaks a lot to this colonial history. Why did the Japanese build this narrow gauge railway up this very tall mountain? Well, it's to get stuff out of it and to bring it down the mountain to the plains, and then most of it to get it from there to Japan. And so again, we're going to see things like that where what looks like it may just look like a beautiful scene or a building or a cultural twist or something, and I'm always interested in what those things show about the history of a place, and in this case, this multi-level colonial history of Taiwan that we'll be getting into. But if that's too heavy for now, again, I think it's just an incredible picture to appreciate. But I wanted to just introduce some of the main periods of Taiwanese history. And so hopefully I haven't block too much of this slide here with my picture and things like that. But the first period, as I mentioned, is this period in the 17th century when the Dutch had colonized most of Taiwan. The Spanish had a couple colonial holdings in the north. They are kicked out in 1662, and they're supplanted by a loyalist movement of the Ming dynasty in China. By then, the Qing dynasty, the Manchu Qing dynasty, had taken over China, and there was this loyalist movement that was based in Taiwan and hoping to overthrow the Qing dynasty. If that sounds like anything you've heard about in the later history in the 20th century in particular, well, then you're right that we will see a replay of a certain sort a few hundred years later. So that loyalist movement lasts for about 20 years until it's finally taken over, as I said, by the Manchu Qing dynasty. That rules China for about 2.5 centuries. And as you can see, they rule Taiwan in the middle of that period for a little bit more than 2 centuries. In 1895, they're defeated in a war by the Japanese, who take Taiwan as their first colony. And they look at Taiwan as a laboratory for a lot of the methods that they've been learning about from the West. They hope to learn from Western colonialism and then to improve upon it as well. And that's going to be something that we'll touch on, is the pride that the Japanese took in ruling Taiwan as an enlightened empire, and not like Western colonial powers and say looking at the British in India, the Japanese aimed for a more enlightened colonial rule. There's also this incredible history of brutality, as you may know, in Japanese colonial rule of Korea, and a lot of violence and extraction of Taiwan, as I was already talking about. Suffice it to say, it's super complicated. We're not going to talk a lot about the Japanese period, but it's really important. I think that we'll go back to it here and there as a way of foregrounding the government that will take over in 1945 at the end of World War II. And so Taiwan is given to one of the victors of World War II, one of the victorious allies, and that's the Republic of China that was ruling the mainland. The Republic of China had defeated the Qing dynasty in 1912 and had ruled China, as you can see here, through World War II, and were one of the victorious allies. From 1945 to 1949, they ruled the mainland, and they ruled their new province of Taiwan. So this is now getting into a period that we're going to be talking more about. And the moment when they get Taiwan from the Japanese and set about trying to make it more Chinese. Again, you're aware of the really, really awful war that the Chinese fought against the Japanese in that part of World War II. Something like 25 million people were killed in China by the Japanese military. It's awful to contemplate. It's just a horrible history to learn about and to think about. And then the real strange twist is that after the Chinese help defeat the Japanese and World War II ends, and they get this new province of Taiwan, the people of Taiwan have been Japanese subjects for 50 years. And so it's a really troubling thing for this government, the Republic of China, to get Taiwan and to be faced with this whole population that's grown up now as Japanese subjects and that speaks Japanese and so on. So this is now we're getting kind of closer to the history we're going to be talking about, where it gets really, really interesting, really, really complicated. You also may know that in 1949, the Republic of China loses the mainland. The Communist Party defeats the Nationalist Party, essentially the one-party state of the Republic of China. The communists established the People's Republic of China on the mainland, and the Republic of China flees from China to Taiwan. And there they are today. So we're going to be facing this question of this island called Taiwan that's ruled by this government called the Republic of China that was founded on the mainland in 1911, 1912, but still has this, again, this name that reflects their origins in ruling China. The flag that you can see here on the left, superimposed on the map, is the flag from back in the day when it was this one-party state that was ruling the mainland. And so that's going to make for a lot of really complicated processes. This period of the last 70 years or so that Taiwan has been ruled by the ROC, we can split into a couple of very broad periods. And I already see a typo. I apologize for that. That's supposed to say one-party authoritarian rule. I somehow lost an A there. But from 1945 into the 1980s, the KMT, or the Chinese Nationalist Party that had ruled China, now rules Taiwan. They're often hoping to get back and fight back and get their way back to China in the interests of this ongoing civil war with the Chinese communists. They ruled Taiwan for this 40-year period or so in pretty strict authoritarian fashion. This is putting it pretty broadly, and there are different periods when that authoritarian rule is more strict, and then it sometimes will become looser, and people gain more freedoms for several years, and so on. But you can make this broad case that there's 40 plus years of very strict authoritarian rule, sometimes verging on the murderous, and there's some pretty awful episodes of violence used by the Nationalist Party to get this island under control and to make sure that the communists will not take this last province from them. This is now getting into some of the questions we'll be looking at pretty closely. Since the late 1980s, Taiwan has become a very free democracy. And so the free elections beginning in the early 1990s, the first presidential free election is 1996. And so we can look at this period of the last 30 years or so as a period of real growing democracy, a real free country with civil rights, very progressive policies and things like that. Ironically, though, we're going to see that this is also the period that the US is kind of going back on that partnership it had with the ROC on Taiwan. So one ironic thing we'll be grappling with is the fact that when Taiwan was ruled by this authoritarian nationalist party, we were very close allies with them. As it became more democratic, after the late 80s into the 90s and 2000s and so on, that's precisely the era when the US has decided to become much more interested in going into business with China and really going back on some of our earlier commitments to Taiwan. And so that's also just really just complicated and important trend and part of modern history that we'll be talking about. I wanted to share just some general facts about Taiwan. We're going to see a lot of it. One of the things I love about this class is that we will see what it looks like to live in Taipei, and we'll see what it looks like to live in the mountains, actually just very close to Taipei. We'll see what it looks like to live, or to be in the coal mines, and we'll see what it looks like to be in the very southern tip in this beach resort area in different films and so on. So I really like that about this class. And also just sort of like I said, we'll get those different engagements with the way that Taiwan looks and sounds and things like that. I also just wanted to introduce some general facts if this helps situate this place for us. Again, we don't hear about it a lot. It's not a huge country, but a lot happens there. It's been very, very important to world trade and Asian trade and the fate and the desires of a lot of empires for the last 400 years. Taiwan is something like 1/11 the size of California, and it's got more than half the population of California. It's got about 23 million people. If that kind of helps you understand, again, the size and population density, but more specifically, it's a very developed country. It's the 17th richest country on Earth in terms of per capita income and purchasing power. The ROC government has the 5th largest foreign exchange reserves. It's the US's 10th largest trading partner. Again, we will consider this fact alongside the idea that the US doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, and it hasn't recognized Taiwan since 1979. In 1979, we switched recognition from the ROC on Taiwan to the People's Republic of China, pretty clearly in the interests of the Cold War and trying to have a united front against the Soviet Union, but also, of course, business. And American companies saw that, those billion Chinese people and said, that's a lot of business that we need to be getting in on. And so again, we have this fact of the US and Taiwan having this close relationship, even while we do not recognize them as a country. We'll be talking about the fact that Taiwan is not in the United Nations. Taiwan is not in the World Health Organization. We'll be talking very soon about why it would have helped the world and the World Health Organization for Taiwan to be a member over the last year or so. But to go on with some of these other statistics, if this helps put this place in some perspective, many people rank their healthcare system as the best healthcare system on earth. And the COVID experience that hopefully you've been reading about definitely shows that. In terms of politics, I've mentioned it's a free country with an independent judiciary. It's known as the second most free political system in Asia. It's the 37th most literate country on earth. It's the 40th longest life expectancy, 185th highest infant mortality, which puts it obviously at the good end of that, with again, very advanced healthcare system. 18th highest population density in the world, and 186th highest population growth rate. One of the things we're going to be seeing in these films is a very quick trend, even over the last couple of generations, towards very small family women waiting a long time before they get married and have kids, or perhaps not getting married at all. And so in these ways, it's a very modern country, a very advanced country, as well as being very politically progressive, and, as I keep saying, being excluded from these important world organizations. I gave you a couple readings in the syllabus about how Taiwan has handled COVID. This isn't a public health class, and so you may think it's kind of a strange thing that I would give you these articles right now. But I think this is actually really important to situating, again, this society and just getting a sense of how they dealt with it. Taiwan is very, very close to China, obviously. Something like 2 million people out of Taiwan's 23 million population, something like 2 million people go back and forth between Taiwan and China regularly for business. So roughly, not quite a tenth, but maybe like a 12th or something of the population is going back and forth between China and Taiwan. Because they have these very close business ties with China, even though politically, we would definitely call this a very heated rivalry at the very least. And you could probably use even more dramatic terms than that in terms of China's desire to take Taiwan and to what they call, reunify with Taiwan. But despite those political tensions that we'll be talking a lot about and seeing, there's no doubt that during this course, something will happen that will bring these tensions to the fore. Despite those political tensions, Taiwan and China have very, very close business ties. And so again, there are 2 million people in Taiwan that go back and forth for business. Because they have these ties, Taiwan is very invested in understanding the health trends in China. So they've always had people on the ground in China trying to figure out when the next disease is coming. Taiwan was hit pretty hard by SARS in the early 2000s, and there's H1N1 and other diseases that have come out of southern China. And again, Taiwan is right there. It's definitely in their interest to watch out and get a sense of what those trends are so that they can prepare for what's definitely going to come very soon. And so this chart here gives you a sense of how the US has, frankly failed to deal with COVID compared to Taiwan. These are not typos. So California has had 3.6 million COVID cases. Taiwan had 1,000. And you can see those in the yellow column there, cases per 1 million. The California rate, the US rate is roughly 2,000 times worse than the Taiwan rate in terms of cases per 1 million. Where California's had 58,000 deaths from COVID, Taiwan has had 10. And so these articles that I wanted you to read give you some sense of how they decided to deal with it, how that democratic society with an epidemiologist from Johns Hopkins as their vice president went about trying to protect their population when they saw this disease coming out of China. And so again, it's not a public health class, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time on maybe how the US has failed in this and what we should have done better. This is not the place for that discussion. But by seeing what Taiwan did, I'm hoping that it'll give us some sense of, again, a different kind of system, where democracy works in a different way and science is understood in a different way, and community is understood in a different way. And the idea of freedom is understood in a different way. And I'll just leave it at that for now. Hopefully you kind of understand what I'm getting at, but I think that I just felt like at this time to study Taiwan and not talk about what's happened under COVID and not to at least make a few broad comparisons would be missing a pretty important opportunity. So I'm going to turn this off and maybe just get back to a few more general ideas about the class. The main thing by just showing you those general facts is to try to provide some depth and some background. We're going to jump into a couple of films from the 1990s, 25 years ago, and so a lot has changed in Taiwan since then. But we'll at least get to see what at least Taipei looked like in the 1990s. And again, these statistics and things like that, it's not a really thorough entrance or introduction, but I thought it would be useful just to provide some kind of, like I keep saying, background and some context and maybe a few windows in, and maybe some of these statistics might get you thinking about just different things about the society. It'd be interesting to see if any of these things come out in different ways in these films. You've heard me so far say a lot of very positive things about Taiwan and its society and its development. And it's the progress they've made. And I've spent a lot of time there, and I've just been personally, thrilled, honored, excited to see those things happening and to see it become so free and prosperous and things like that. As we watch these films, though, we're going to see a lot of things that don't look great. We're going to see a lot of social problems. We're going to see a lot of issues that might strike us as different from things we've thought about, or different than the way we handle relationships between people, or between men and women, or between different ethnic groups. And so this is an interesting part of a class like this, which is that on one hand, we're in a lot of the films we're watching engage with these critiques, or perhaps are based on some of these critiques. And so what I want us to be able to do, and I really want to encourage, is that you all feel the freedom and that you have the right to weigh in and engage with these films and watch them and try to understand what they're about and what they were made to say, and to give your judgment, to give your moral judgment perhaps on the things that you see, or you give a social critique on the things that you see. And I think the best way that we're going to do that is by basing that in what these films were, meant to express, the things that Taiwanese directors wanted to express to Taiwanese audiences. And so I'll probably say this several times during the class, but in a certain way, a lot of these films aren't really made for us, as this kind of international audience. A lot of the films are really made by Taiwanese directors for Taiwanese viewers. Some of them get released worldwide, and you'll probably be able to see which ones are made with maybe more of an international viewer in mind. But a lot of these films are really made about Taiwanese issues, for Taiwanese people. At the same time, though, we get a chance to watch them and engage with them. And if we take time and we read about these issues, and we prepare to watch these films and we watch them and engage deeply and really, really grapple with them in class, I really do think that we earn the right to weigh in. And like I said, to offer a social critique or even, a moral critique. I think it's okay to feel a little bit apprehensive and to say, well, I'm not so sure. I don't really understand the society. I don't feel like it's my right to say something. But I would just want to say, I do think it is our right to do that if we're doing so in a serious way and really trying to get to the bottom of what these films meant when they were made in Taiwan, by Taiwanese directors. And if we base our our thinking in that, then I do think that it's not a problem. It's not a problem of cultural appropriation or cultural imperialism or things like that. And so if people are interested in these topics, we can definitely get into them more. But I would like us to be able to just dig in, in an informed way. I have a few other notes here of things I wanted to bring up. I've assigned reading from this book, Taiwan, A Political History. So the first chapter is what I've asked you to read for this first week. This chapter is on the Japanese occupation that I was mentioning. That lasts from 1895 to 1945. Again, this is background. The first films we watch are set in the 1990s. They're not directly about Japanese occupation for sure. There are ways that history comes through, and that we can talk about. We will talk, and the fact of this of Taiwan's rule by the Japanese for those 50 years, that does set up in another way what happens after the Japanese leave in 1945, which is ruled by another outside government called the Republic of China. And so even though we're not going to be grappling so directly with the Japanese period, I think it's still pretty useful to get that sense of background, that sense of, again, as I was introducing, all these external empires that rule Taiwan through time, and the fact of how Taiwanese people then have to deal, what do you do now that the Japanese come and are enforcing Japanese religion and language and customs and so on? And then when the Japanese leave and on a dime, you've now got to forget everything you knew about being a Japanese subject and learn how to be a citizen of the Republic of China, and to learn Chinese, learn Mandarin Chinese especially. And so again, the facts about the Japanese occupation are a little bit extraneous to what we're doing, but I think they will set up a pretty good background for our discussions. I think that I will wrap this up here just by saying, again, I'm really excited about this class. Hopefully you get a sense of my excitement about this topic and my enthusiasm, my interest in Taiwanese history and these films. I'm looking forward to seeing you on Monday. And my plan on Monday, I put something in the syllabus about this, and I just wanted to clarify something here. The class time on the books is 8:10 a.m. to 10 o'clock a.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays. Since we're going to have this asynchronous stuff, I'm proposing that we start our classes instead on 8:45 Monday morning and Wednesday morning in the future. This class, when we meet this first Monday, I'd like to start at 8:30, and partly because we missed the Wednesday class session because of the holiday. So I want to get a little bit more time this Monday just to talk about maybe some of these ideas or the syllabus or the assignments, or introduce the films we'll be getting into. So I hope that makes sense. If anything here brings up questions you had between now and Monday, let me know. But again, really excited to be teaching this class and looking forward to seeing you on Monday. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.